At 7:02 on a quiet Sunday morning, two American privates stared at a radar screen showing the biggest signal either of them had ever seen. Something enormous, more than 130 miles out, was heading straight for Hawaii. They phoned it in, and the officer on the other end of the line answered with four words that would haunt America for a century: "Don't worry about it." 53 minutes later, Pearl Harbor was on fire, and for over 80 years, you've been told a story about that morning: that the attack came out of nowhere, that it was madness, blind aggression from an empire drunk on conquest. That story is wrong, because the real reason Japan attacked Pearl Harbor was locked in months earlier, in a conference room in Tokyo, by men who had already run the numbers and concluded they would probably lose. They attacked anyway, and once you understand why, you will never see December 7th the same way again. Because this was not an act of confidence, it was an act of desperation. And desperation is the most dangerous force on Earth. To find the real reason, forget the bombs for a moment. Follow the oil. Here's the number they don't put in your textbook: 80%. 8 out of every 10 barrels of oil in the Japanese Empire came from one country, the United States. The most feared navy in the Pacific ran on American fuel. Japan's fighters, its tanks, its factories, its merchant fleet, almost all of it burned imported oil. 9 barrels out of every 10 came from overseas, which means the nation Japan was about to attack was the same nation keeping it alive. Why would anyone bite the hand holding their oxygen mask? That's where this story starts getting dark, because by 1941, Japan was trapped in a war it could not win and could not quit. 4 years earlier, its generals had marched into China promising victory in 3 months. Instead, they got a bottomless pit, hundreds of thousands of casualties, around 1 million soldiers bogged down on the Asian mainland, and a war machine devouring steel, rubber, and fuel faster than the empire could buy it. Washington watched and started turning the screws. First, embargoes on scrap metal, then machine tools, then aviation fuel, each one a warning shot. Then, in 1940, Roosevelt made a move that changed the entire chessboard. He ordered the United States Pacific Fleet out of California and parked it at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, 2,000 miles closer to Japan. A loaded gun laid on the table, pointed west. And here's the twist: almost nobody knows. The admiral commanding that fleet took one look at Pearl Harbor and was horrified. His name was James Richardson, and he flew to Washington to tell the president to his face that the anchorage was exposed, undersupplied, and dangerously vulnerable to one thing above all: a surprise attack. Roosevelt removed him from command. The admiral who predicted Pearl Harbor lost his job for predicting it. Remember that, because it will not be the last warning that dies in this story. Then came July 1941, the month the fuse was lit. Japanese troops rolled into southern Indochina, putting their bombers within range of British Malaya and the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies. Washington's answer was instant and brutal. Every Japanese asset in America frozen. Every drop of American oil cut off. Britain and the Dutch followed within days. In a single week, the empire's fuel line was severed. And in a locked room in Tokyo, naval planners sat down and did the arithmetic that would end up killing millions. The stockpiles held roughly 2 years of oil in peacetime. If war came, 18 months, maybe less. The fleet was burning fuel just sitting at anchor. Do you see it now? From that moment on, Japan wasn't making decisions anymore. A clock was. Every single day of peace made Japan permanently weaker. Every day, the tanks drained a little lower. Every day, the window for any military option closed a little further. In 18 months, the mighty Imperial Navy would be a floating museum. Historians call it the cornered empire, and a cornered empire only sees two doors. Door number 1, back down. Pull out of China. Accept America's terms. Survive. Except in 1941 Japan, that door had blood on it. Because here's what your history class skipped. For a decade, Japanese politics had been ruled by assassination. In 1932, the prime minister was shot dead inside his own residence by young officers who thought he was too soft. In 1936, rebel soldiers murdered government ministers in their beds. Moderates lived under permanent death threats. In Tokyo, suggesting retreat from China wasn't a policy position. It was a suicide note. Which left door number 2. If America won't sell you oil, take someone else's. 3,000 miles to the south, the Dutch East Indies pumped more oil than Japan could ever burn. Weakly defended, ripe. But when the planners unrolled the map, they saw the problem. Sitting directly on the sea lanes between Japan and that oil, the Philippines. American territory, filling up with American bombers. And behind it, at Pearl Harbor, the American Pacific Fleet. The conclusion reached in Tokyo was as cold as it was insane. We cannot take the oil without war with the United States. And if that war is unavoidable, then we choose the moment it begins. But this is where the story takes a turn no screenwriter would dare invent. Because the man ordered to design that war was the one man in Japan who kept insisting it could not be won. His name was Isoroku Yamamoto, and he knew America in a way no one else in the Japanese high command did. He had studied at Harvard, he had spent years in Washington as a naval attaché, he had traveled across the country, stood in the Texas oil fields, walked the assembly lines of Detroit, and beaten American officers at their own poker tables. He came home carrying a warning he repeated to anyone who would listen. You have no idea what you would be waking up. He opposed the alliance with Hitler so loudly that ultra-nationalists put him on a death list. The Navy handed him a fleet command at sea partly just to keep him alive. And when Japan's prime minister asked him what would happen in a war with America, Yamamoto gave an answer that became prophecy. "Give me 6 months," he said, "and I will run wild. After that, I have no confidence at all." 6 months. Lock that number away. It comes back at the end of this story in a way that will give you chills. Now here's the paradox. Precisely because Yamamoto believed Japan could not survive a long war, he became obsessed with an idea most of his own navy called impossible. If the war must happen, make it short. Don't wait for the American fleet to come steaming west. Kill it in its sleep, on day 1, with a blow so devastating that Washington negotiates before its factories even wake up. Impossible, said the traditionalists. Pearl Harbor sat thousands of miles from Japan. Its waters were barely 40 feet deep, and aerial torpedoes plunge far deeper than that before leveling out. They would bury themselves in the mud, and no fleet on Earth could cross the North Pacific undetected. Then, in November 1940, on the other side of the world, the British handed Yamamoto his proof of concept. In a single night, 21 obsolete canvas biplanes crippled half the Italian battle fleet inside the shallow harbor of Taranto. Japanese officers were soon on site, measuring, photographing, taking notes. The impossible now had a blueprint. Japanese engineers strapped wooden fins onto their torpedoes so they would run shallow. Pilots spent months screaming low over a bay in southern Japan chosen for one reason. It looked almost exactly like Pearl Harbor. Piece by piece, in total secrecy, the impossible attack became a machine. But while the pilots trained, something happened in Tokyo that summer. Something so damning it barely appears in the documentaries, and it changes everything about how you should understand this attack. In the summer of 1941, the Japanese government quietly gathered about 36 of the empire's most brilliant young minds, officers, economists, bureaucrats, into a secret body called the Total War Research Institute. Their assignment, simulate in exhaustive detail a full-scale war between Japan and the United States. Play it out, month by month, year by year. They did, and in August 1941, they delivered their verdict to the cabinet. Japan loses. Not might lose, loses. Early victories, then a long grind, then resource collapse, then total defeat. Their simulation even predicted the Soviet Union storming in at the end to feed on the corpse. Almost the only thing those young men failed to imagine was the atomic bomb. 4 months before Pearl Harbor, Japan's own experts handed its leaders a script of their own destruction, accurate almost to the year. And the army minister sitting in that briefing, a general named Hideki Tojo, waved it away. Real war, he said, does not follow calculations. Japan had beaten impossible odds against Russia in 1905. Spirit beats arithmetic. 2 months later, that man became Prime Minister of Japan. Let that sink in. The question in Tokyo was never really, can we win? Their own numbers said no. The Navy's top admiral admitted as much to the emperor himself, comparing Japan to a critically ill patient. The operation would be terribly dangerous, but without it, death was certain anyway. Tojo put it even more bluntly. Sometimes, he said, a man must simply close his eyes and leap from the platform of the great temple. That was the plan, not victory, a leap. And yet, and this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you, the gamble was not as irrational as it sounds, because it rested on one psychological read, that Americans did not have the stomach for a long war, and in 1941 that read looked correct. America was bitterly isolationist. The public was desperate to stay out of foreign wars. That very August, the same month as the Doomsday Report, the United States Congress voted on whether to keep its own drafted soldiers in uniform. It passed by a single vote, 1. The American Army nearly dissolved itself 4 months before Pearl Harbor. So Tokyo's bet was this: smash the fleet, seize the oil, throw up a fortified wall of islands across the Pacific, and a soft, divided America, staring at years of blood to claw it all back, will choose to make a deal. They weren't betting on victory. They were betting on American weakness. It would prove to be the single worst bet of the 20th century. But nobody knew that yet. November 26, 1941. Washington hands Japan its final terms. Get out of China. Tokyo reads it as an ultimatum, final proof that talking is over. But here's the detail that exposes the whole charade. By the time that note even reached Tokyo, the strike force had already sailed 6 aircraft carriers, more than 350 warplanes, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, tankers, slipping out of a fog-shrouded bay in the remote Kuril Islands under absolute radio silence. Transmitter keys were physically taken from the radio operators so that no one could break silence even by accident. And instead of the direct route, the fleet vanished into the empty, storm-torn North Pacific, a corridor so violent that commercial shipping refused to use it, refueling in heaving seas, praying not to be seen. 11 days, nearly 4,000 miles. Not one ship spotted them. On December 2nd, a coded message crackled across the fleet. Climb Mount Niitaka. The attack was on. Meanwhile, in Washington, something extraordinary was happening. Something that would fuel 80 years of conspiracy theories. America was reading Japan's mail. Army codebreakers had pulled off one of the greatest intelligence feats in history, reverse engineering Japan's top diplomatic cipher machine without ever laying eyes on one. They codenamed the intercepts Magic. For months, Roosevelt's inner circle had been reading Tokyo's secret cables, sometimes faster than Japan's own ambassadors could. Which raises the question people still whisper today. Did Washington know? Here is the uncomfortable truth. They knew war was coming. On November 27th, the Navy flashed a message to its Pacific commanders that opened with words no officer had ever seen in an official dispatch. Consider this a war warning. But every clue pointed south. Malaya, Thailand, the Philippines. Pearl Harbor? Too far, too shallow, too absurd. The diplomatic cables never named a target because Japan's own diplomats were never told. What happened next was not a conspiracy. It was something scarier. Now watch how many alarms fail in the final 12 hours. Saturday night, December 6th. Codebreakers decode a long message from Tokyo, 13 parts of 14, and rush it to the White House. Roosevelt reads it and says quietly, "This means war." But it names no time, no place. Washington goes to bed. Sunday morning, Part 14 arrives. Japan is breaking off negotiations. Then one final intercept, an instruction to deliver that message at exactly 1 p.m. Washington time. A Navy officer stares at it and does the math that stops his heart. 1 p.m. in Washington is sunrise over the middle of the Pacific. Over Hawaii, Army Chief of Staff George Marshall scrambles a warning to Pearl Harbor, but atmospheric interference is blocking the Army's radio link that morning. So the most urgent message in American history is handed to a commercial telegraph company. It travels to Honolulu as an ordinary telegram, no priority marking, and ends up in the pouch of a young motorcycle messenger weaving through Sunday traffic. He will deliver it hours after the attack, and the failures keep stacking. 6:37 a.m. Hawaiian time. An American destroyer, the Ward, spots a miniature submarine creeping toward the harbor entrance and sinks it. Shots fired. More than an hour before the planes arrive. The captain reports it immediately, and the report crawls up a sleepy Sunday chain of command while officers ask each other for confirmation. 7:02 a.m. Two privates at a radar station on Oahu's northern tip watch the largest blip they have ever seen, over 130 miles out and closing fast. They call it in, but the lieutenant on duty knows a flight of American B-17 bombers is due in from California that very morning, from almost the same direction. So he says it, don't worry about it. The privates watch the blip crawl closer for another half hour. Then they shut the station down and head to breakfast. 7:55 a.m. The sky over Pearl Harbor fills with aircraft, and for one heartbeat, sailors below actually wave, assuming the planes are American. Then the first torpedo hits the water. In the lead aircraft, the strike commander radios a code word back to the fleet, repeated 3 times, the signal that total surprise has been achieved. Tora, Tora, Tora. What follows is 90 minutes of apocalypse. A converted battleship shell punches through the deck of the USS Arizona and detonates her forward ammunition magazines. The blast heaves the entire battleship out of the water and breaks her apart. 1,177 men, gone almost instantly. The ship is on the bottom in 9 minutes. Nearby, the Oklahoma takes torpedo after torpedo and rolls completely over, trapping hundreds of men inside. For days afterward, rescuers will hear tapping through the steel. 2 waves, 353 aircraft. When the smoke clears, 2,403 Americans dead. 8 battleships smashed, nearly 200 aircraft destroyed, most without ever leaving the ground. Japanese losses, 29 planes. On paper, the most one-sided surprise attack in modern history. In Tokyo, crowds pour into the streets to celebrate. But on the Japanese flagship, as the last planes thump down onto the decks, the architects of the raid feel something curdle in their stomachs. Because 3 things have gone wrong. 3 things that will decide the entire war. 1. The real targets weren't there. The strike was designed above all to kill America's aircraft carriers. And by pure chance, every single one was out of port. The carrier Enterprise was actually due back the day before the attack and was delayed at sea by a storm. Bad weather saved the very ships that would go on to win the Pacific War. 2. The admiral commanding the strike force, cautious and rattled and determined to quit while ahead, orders the fleet to turn for home rather than launch another strike, which means his pilots fly away leaving untouched the least glamorous and most important targets in Hawaii, the repair docks, the submarine base, and above all, the fuel farm. 4.5 million barrels of oil sitting in unarmored tanks. Burn those, and the American fleet has to retreat all the way to California. Admiral Nimitz himself later said losing that fuel could have prolonged the war by 2 years. Japan crossed an ocean to destroy American power in the Pacific and left its gas tank untouched. 3, and this is the cruelest irony of all, the harbor itself. Those 40 feet of shallow water that made the attack so difficult to plan, they meant the destroyed battleships sank just a few feet, settling onto soft mud inside a friendly port right next to intact repair yards. America didn't lose those ships. It got them back. 6 of the 8 would be raised, rebuilt, and sent back to war. And 3 years later, 5 of them would stand in a line across a strait in the Philippines and annihilate a Japanese battle squadron in the last big-gun naval battle in human history. The ghosts of Pearl Harbor pulled the trigger. But Japan's most catastrophic failure that morning wasn't military at all. It happened 5,000 miles away, inside an embassy in Washington. The entire gamble depended on one legal fig leaf. Japan's message breaking off negotiations was supposed to be in American hands before the first bomb fell. A technicality, but it was the difference between an attack and a sneak attack. Instead, the embassy staff fumbled the decoding and typing, and Japan's envoys handed over the note while Pearl Harbor was already burning. And here's the fact almost nobody knows. It wasn't even a declaration of war, just a notice that the talks were over.
The next day, Roosevelt stood before Congress and branded December 7th, a date which will live in infamy. That single word, infamy, did more damage to Japan than any weapon in the American arsenal. Because remember what the whole gamble required: a divided America with no appetite for sacrifice. The country whose army had survived by one vote in August. That America died at 7:55 on Sunday morning. By Monday, recruiting stations had lines around the block. Isolationism didn't fade. It evaporated overnight. Japan had bet everything on breaking America's will, and instead, in 90 minutes, it forged the most unified, vengeful America that has ever existed. Yamamoto understood immediately. While Tokyo celebrated, the man who built the attack sat grim and silent, telling his staff the triumph meant nothing if all it did was enrage the enemy. Decades later, Hollywood would put a famous line in his mouth about awakening a sleeping giant. He probably never said it. He didn't need to. He'd been saying it, in his own words, for years. And now, remember the number: 6 months. For 6 months, the prophecy's first half came true with terrifying precision. Japan ran wild. Guam, Wake, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, and yes, the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies. The empire seized everything it had attacked Pearl Harbor to get. On paper, the plan had worked. Then came the 4th of June, 1942. Off a speck of coral called Midway, American dive bombers dropped out of the sky onto the Japanese carrier fleet. The very same carriers that had launched the Pearl Harbor strike and caught them with their decks packed with fuel and bombs. In about 5 minutes, 3 of them were burning wrecks. By nightfall, a 4th was dying. The unstoppable force that opened the war was wiped out in a single day. 5 months and 28 days after Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto had promised 6 months. He missed by 3 days. So, the real reason, it was never madness. It was never confidence. Strip everything else away and here is what remains: an empire with 18 months of fuel in its tanks, leaders who could be assassinated for choosing retreat, a secret study proving the war was unwinnable, and one final bet that Americans were too soft, too divided, too comfortable to fight a long war. Japan didn't attack because it believed it would win. Japan attacked because it was certain that not attacking meant losing slowly, quietly, without a fight. And when nations face a choice between certain decline and a violent gamble, history says they take the gamble every time. The war games predicted the ending. Yamamoto predicted the ending. Even the men who launched the planes suspected the ending. They launched anyway. Because the most dangerous country on earth is never the one that thinks it can win. It's the one convinced it has nothing left to lose.